Hello, this is Mike Swanson. I run the website WallStreetWindow.com, and the odds are that you're watching this video because you got an email from me telling you that it's up. Now, if you're not on my free email list, go below this video to subscribe. It's completely free. And then once in the morning, every single day, you will get from me my email with the top financial and geopolitical headlines of the day in my analysis. And today, what I want to speak with you about is the situation in Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I want to discuss with you when and how it might come to an end, because it's having a huge impact on the world. Gas prices are going up, food prices are going up, and in many ways, this event is very easily likely to go down in history as having a bigger impact on people's day-to-day lives than 9/11 did. You know, 9/11 sent shockwaves throughout the United States, and a lot of events spun off after it. But this is different because this is already impacting people's wallets and their bellies, in fact, all in different parts of the world. Because it's not just gas prices going up, the price of wheat and corn are going up too, because Russia and Ukraine are the biggest global exporters of both of those critical commodity products. And they also are the biggest, Russia is the biggest exporter for fertilizer. So when they can't or are not exporting as much fertilizer as they were, fertilizer prices go up, which causes the prices of crops and even meat to go up all over the world, because that's a key ingredient for farmers. And when the price of corn goes up, what that means, it's not simply that you and I and other people eat corn, but corn is the main staple used to feed cows. So when the cost of feeding cows goes up, then the cost of cows goes up, and pigs and chicken. That corn, it's not the same thing we eat. It's a different type of corn, but it's then grounded down into something chewable for these very, these animals. So what's going on? We're going to look at news sources from ones geared to a mass audience to one geared towards what is essentially what C. Wright Mills called the power elite. People in the United States, that is, that are at the top of corporate America and government, talking about maybe 100,000 people, and most of them based in the DC area. So we're going to look at what type of what information is geared towards them. But first, let's take a look at what one of the biggest news sources for people is saying today. And we're going to build some building blocks and then see, to answer the question when and how may this end. So today, Biden, this is the top headline when it comes to Ukraine and the United States. This is Fox News. Biden is heading to Europe for a Ukraine summit, meeting leaders of NATO, not simply military leaders, but also political leaders of various NATO member countries. Now, we're going to see images, this summit. We're going to see Biden. We'll probably get some, statements from the Biden press secretary. We'll see this become the news cycle for today. But what is important will be discussed in complete secrecy. It will not be revealed to us consuming, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox. No, because what is really going to be discussed at these meetings is not simply how we're going to support Zelensky in Ukraine, but what are we going to do next? And what type of moves will we make if Russia does these other things? It's contingency planning that's going to be taking place to get everyone united on a game plan, which is likely to be kept secret. And this is talked about in this story today in the New York Times. U.S. makes contingency plans in case Russia uses its most powerful weapons. Now, this story is written by David Sanger. At least he's one of the co-authors of it. And he essentially acts as a mouthpiece for the Pentagon and the national security state. And when he writes these articles, they're written for an American audience, but they also are written for the rest of the world to read. It's sort of as if I was an American living in 1980, reading Pravda to see what the Kremlin wanted to tell leaders in the United States. That's sort of the role that David Sanger partly plays. And I just want to pick out a few comments that he says in this article, which are really critical. Contingency planning. Well, one of the things he says that they are looking at and are going to discuss, Biden's going to discuss with NATO. He says they've got this contingency team called the Tiger Team inside Biden's National Security Council that's been doing contingency planning since the war even began. And one of the things they are discussing is what to do if Russia uses a small tactical nuclear bomb inside Ukraine. What would that mean? And they do say, look, we're not seeing any activity to suggest that Russia is preparing to do that. So don't get scared about it. However, it's a serious situation when Russia is invading another country, and they have been ratcheting up the rhetoric about the usage of nuclear weapons. So here's 2 paragraphs I want you to think about, and we're going to return to them. Senator Angus King of Maine, an independent, a member of the Senate Intelligence Armed Services Committee. He just took a trip to Poland, and he told the New York Times that as Russian forces struggle to make headway, Putin could strike a diplomatic agreement, or he could intensify his bombardment of Ukrainian cities and level them, or he could lash out against the West with a cyber attack. So he's looking at a couple possible scenarios that are likely to now take place: diplomacy, intensity of bombardment against Ukrainian cities, or a cyber attack against the West. Remember those 3 things. So these 3 possible moves in the game by Putin are things that I'm sure are being discussed today at this NATO summit in secret. But King makes this statement: a 4th option is escalate to de-escalate the situation, which is a tactical nuclear weapon. In other words, Putin would detonate a small nuclear weapon as a warning sign to up the ante of the crisis situation in the war, and then de-escalate, which would mean diplomacy. So use a small tactical bomb to turn what is, let's say, a war between Russia and Ukraine into a potentially worldwide catastrophe, and use that crisis to go to the negotiating table, force negotiations. So that's a scary scenario, and one possibility being discussed and floated at the highest levels of NATO today. Now, one other story about the war is this came out at the Times of Israel. NATO is estimating that Russia has suffered 30 to 40,000 casualties in Ukraine. Now, when they began the invasion, they had something like 140,000 troops involved. I think the number is less than that, but let's say maximum 140,000. So that's a huge percentage, if true, of their men taken out of action. Now, they're not all been killed, and these figures are likely exaggerations. So once we go into the article, this senior military official from NATO is saying between 7,000 and 15,000 Russians they think have been killed in the war. Russia gave an estimate around 500 about a month ago and have said nothing since then. Now, I saw another story today that said the U.S. Defense Department is thinking it's no more than 10,000 that have been killed. So these figures in this story are likely inflated. And let's go with 10,000. Well, 10,000 is still almost 10% killed, or let's say 7% killed of the Russian army in the months of action. That's a staggering number of people. And even 10% is a staggering number of people. During the entire Vietnam War, the United States did not lose more than 50,000 people. In the Korean War, a similar number, a little larger, but still. So we've already seen the Russians lose 20% of the men that the United States lost in dead, that is in Vietnam and also in the Korean War in 1 month period. So pretty shocking. This is turning into a war of attrition. And the thing is, it's hard to think that such a situation is going to be able to go on forever. It's got to change one way or the other. The Russians either have to get the upper hand by more intense military tactics and firepower and intensity of using other weapons, who knows what, or they need to end it through some sort of negotiations and diplomacy. And in the end, hopefully that's what happens. And you would think at this point, that's would be the logical thing for the Russians to do, which would help the global economy and provide some relief to the gas and inflation situation. I don't think it would end inflation. I think inflation is part of a much bigger underlying trend in the global economy, as I've discussed in prior videos. But in a short-term basis, all these events, an end of the war would make have an impact. So here's an article in Foreign Affairs. Again, Foreign Affairs is the publication I was referring to that's really written for an elite audience. And it talks about Russia making a deal as a likely scenario and the way this is going to end. But it says that a deal means this is going to be a war that no one is actually likely to win. So in the US media, there has been since day one a lot of cheerleading about this war, a lot of talk that, and I've said a lot of bad things about reported hardships, let's say, about how the war is going for Russia. But in the US media, and if you're outside the United States, and I'm describing the situation, but a lot of the US media has been cheerleading this, saying that the setbacks that Russia has had on the battlefield represents a victory for the West. It's a win for the United States. It's a win for NATO. It's a win for everyone. What this article is actually suggesting, and this article is written for policymakers and the elites, is that, hey, okay, yeah, the battlefield situation might be bad for Russia, but that doesn't mean anyone's actually going to win when this is over with. In fact, this article suggests, and I'm going to link to all these articles in the video so you can see them for yourself. This article suggests that no one is going to win, that the war is likely to end with some sort of diplomatic settlement, which actually does not make anyone an ultimate winner, because Ukraine is going to have to give something up to Russia to end the war, and Russia is not going to get everything it wanted either. Russia, if it were to have a diplomatic solution, a negotiated settlement to this conflict, is not going, that means that they're not going to defeat the Ukrainian government. They're not going to be able to get this Zelensky guy to be replaced with Russian puppets. If they have to negotiate an end of the war, they're not accomplishing all the objectives they set out to accomplish when the war started. At the same time, Zelensky has to give something up. So what's likely to be given up, according to this article, are those two eastern provinces, with that Russia had a lot of control over to start with, and had a lot of Russians live in them, it's likely to have to give them up, likely have to give up other parts of the country, and that's just the way it is. And it's going to be difficult. What happens even if they do that? You know, are they going to have to make deals about the size of their military, how much NATO would help them or not in the future? Are they going to have to declare some sort of neutrality? That's what Russia demands. If they do, what does that actually mean? And it could set up a situation where, you know, these issues aren't all completely settled, but both Russia and Ukraine are likely to end up, if there's a settlement, weaker than they were, both of them, before the war started. So, you know, a lot of people, when they talk about history, as this writer likes to say, talk about World War II, you know, we don't want another Munich. And look how, you know, the war ended with the US as the leader of the Western side and the Soviets. But what about World War I? We don't think about World War I. And World War I is an example of a war in which the, you know, one side did not actually think they lost. That's the German side. And there wasn't a real peace that ended the conflict. There was not peace at last, which was what Woodrow Wilson, the American president, had promised at all. And so that's how a lot of wars end. They don't all start or end like World War II, which is always the lodestar that is used to discuss every single war on American television. Every single opponent or opposition person is always compared to Adolf Hitler, when these comparisons are just one historical event out of countless historical events in human history. And it's just the way it is. This is not a cartoon that we're talking about. Now, this also brings up a very troubling possibility in it, that Putin will have to escalate the war somehow to bring it up to a crisis situation in order to get people, the West, willing or forced to negotiate with them. It appears to me, at least now, so far, that the United States has been very happy with the status quo of the past couple of weeks of arming Ukraine and allowing them to basically put Russia in this situation of a war of attrition. And there's people in the United States that probably would be very happy to do that forever if it was possible, but it's likely not possible. And I'm not going to make judgment on the morality of this or that thing. I have no control over events. I'm simply trying to comment on what is going on and what the different scenarios are. But I would suggest, if there is a diplomatic or negotiated settlement, it could happen quicker than people think. So this idea of an endless war of attrition probably is not going to happen. And how long can Russia fight a war if it's already lost, 7,000 to 10,000 people in it in a month? How long can they really go on fighting? And maybe Ukraine can't fight forever, but it's just a tough situation. So this is the state of things today. The story today, the biggest headline: Biden going to Europe, and the discussions on contingency planning and when and how is this going to end. Some sort of diplomacy, most likely. It's not going to end forever, but is it going to take this turning into a bigger crisis to get to that situation? If that's what happens, it would at some point have a negative impact on the stock market. So on one hand, diplomacy would help the stock market. Ending the war would help the stock market and help the economy. But if it takes the war ratcheting it up even more into a real crisis to get to that point, that would cause some trouble. Not saying it's going to happen next week. It could be several months, probably several months. But the geopolitical news, this is the first video I've done even talking about this. Very hesitant to talk about it because frankly, we and everyone, no matter where you live, is being bombarded by some propaganda about this to, kind of scare you and make you keep watching television and also identify with one side or the other. So in Russia, they're being told one thing, and I don't believe it's true, but what they're being told. But here in the United States where I live, we're also being presented with a version of events that I don't think is 100% accurate. And as I said, a lot of cheerleading, that, oh, Russia's losing, Russia's losing, Russia's losing, they're going to lose, they're going to lose. Well, in the end, probably no one's going to win. That's what really is the sad story about war. Most wars don't bring, war itself brings more losers than it does winners. It's just the way it is. A lot of carnage, a lot of devastation, and they're not good for the economy. In fact, many times financial markets have been shut down because of wars. We just saw it happen in Russia, but the US stock market was closed for over a year when World War I started. They don't tell you about that, but that's what happened. So anyway, if you like this kind of analysis, please hit the like button so YouTube knows that, and I know that, and I'll put more videos out on this sort of topic. And if you're brand new to me and you're just seeing me on YouTube, click subscribe and then click the bell. And then YouTube will send you a notification as soon as the next video I do is up. All that said, have a good day, and I'll be talking with you later.